It's my absolute pleasure to be in conversation with Shehan about his unusual and incredible publishing journey, starting with the publication of his novel Chinaman, which was originally self-published by Shehan and won several prizes, and culminating into the Booker Prize winning international sensation Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, which is being translated into many languages. In the 10 years between the publication of these two remarkable novels, Shehan has written, half-written, discarded, and like several collection of short stories, outlines for novels and stories, and even drafts of manuscripts, many of which found their way into his new collection of short stories, Birth Lottery and Other Surprises, and Seven Moons of Mali Almeida. So, Shehan, I just want to start by asking you about a novel that practically everyone in the audience doesn't know about. And this was published 8 years before your big breakthrough with Chinaman. It was called The Painter. It was shortlisted for the Gratian Prize. And in hindsight, you call it a bad book. You say it's crap. So I just wanted to know, what is this novel about? Why did you write it? And what were your thoughts about the novel at the time?
Oh, really? So we're going to start there. So The Painter, I wrote it when I was 23. And I had this stupid goal that I wanted to write a novel and record an album before I was 25. And I managed to achieve those goals, but of course the album was unlistenable and the novel was unreadable. And I was 23, I hadn't read enough, I didn't quite know how to, there were a lot of ideas in this book. I can barely remember what it was. I think it was about a guy who used to paint graffiti around Colombo, and whatever painting he pictured, whatever painting he came up with, it came true. So he'd draw a bomb blast and it would happen the next week.
So it does have supernatural elements that...
Yeah, but it went, suddenly aliens turned up in the third act, and there was murder mystery there. I mean, it's kind of like Seven Moons, but I think it lacked the discipline and the focus. And the thing is, I think the writers here will know, it takes just as long to write a crap book as it does to write a decent book. And that's why I feel bad. You asked me about judging literary prizes before. I'd hate to do that, because even a bad book, you realize this poor guy has spent, 3 years typing this crap. And it was the same with me. 300 pages of The Painter. It's somewhere in a box under someone's bed, like Mali Almeida's photos. But yeah, I think I'm going to go home and destroy it in case someone uncovers it after my death and tries to publish it. But the thing is this, I mean, I did it, and even though I was young and stupid like all of us are, I was wise enough to know that it was bad and that it shouldn't be published. Because in Sri Lanka, that's what we do. And we'll talk about the Sri Lankan publishing journey. Usually you write a book and then you send it to the printers without any editing, without any publisher involved. But I kind of knew that this thing wasn't going to fly. So I put it away and got depressed and discouraged. But then I realized, okay, if you want to write a book, you need to read a lot more books. Books are made, one book is made up of 1,000 books that you've read, so you need to read at least 1,000 or at least a few hundred. And I thought I need to travel, I need to live life a bit more. And so I kind of gave up my musical ambitions, my literary ambitions, and I just, became a reader. And so when I finally came to write Chinaman, a good 10 years later, I think in my early 30s, I learned from the mistakes of The Painter. So one of the mistakes is talking about a book. I think that's the first thing. Do not talk about a book until it's written. It's bad luck. And also, you're trying to impress people by talking about 5 pages you've written. It can go one of two ways. Either they say, wow, that's a brilliant idea, and then you go home with a big head and you don't write the thing. Or they say, I don't know if that quite works, and then you go home discouraged and you don't write the thing. So basically, just shut up and write the thing and then put it out. So those are the lessons I took out when 10 years later, I wrote Chinaman. So I don't think the time I spent doing The Painter, and even these half-written drafts and all that, I think it's all useful because you learn from those mistakes. But I don't think there's any move to publish The Painter or take it out of that box. I think, it was one of the many foolish mistakes I made when I was young, and Thankfully, there was no Twitter or Facebook, because I probably would have posted it up like an idiot and it would be there. There's no evidence of it, and yeah, hopefully it stays that way.
So you were talking about the rush amongst Sri Lankan writers to send their books to printers. So you did something similar with Chinaman. Despite it winning the Gracian Prize, it was self-published by you. So just let me know about the inspiration behind and the process of writing Chinaman, and why you decided to self-publish it, and what were the learnings from it. Because after the book was self-published, it was discovered by Chiki Sarkar, who was then at Random House, and she made you work really hard on the book. So, I mean, how comfortable and open you were to edit a book that had already been published and had won a prize in Sri Lanka?
So it's not a case of making a choice. You have no choice if you are writing in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, Golkandi, or wherever you are. You don't expect that it'll get published outside of Sri Lanka. Why should you expect that? And I was writing this story about a left-arm leg spinner called a Chinaman bowler who played for Sri Lanka in the 80s. And I was interested in the story, and I thought someone should write this story. It may work. But I knew, so I think when I was writing in the 2000s, we had a few Sri Lankan writers who had achieved international success. So Romesh Gunasekara, Michael Ondaatje, Shyam Selvadurai had published outside in the UK and the US. And my hero Carl Muller, who he had a deal with Penguin, and his books were out in the subcontinent. So I thought it was a possibility, but I didn't take it for granted. And yeah, I took my own advice, and I shut up, and I just wrote the book for 2 years, submitted it for the Gracian Prize. So the Gracian Prize was started by Michael Ondaatje in 1992 after he won the Booker for The English Patient. And it's for Sri Lankan writing in English every year in fiction, poetry, plays, and so on. And they accept unpublished manuscripts. So I submitted this. And to be fair, I'd submitted manuscripts before, and they hadn't even got longlisted or anything, but I just kept doing it. And this one got shortlisted, and then to my astonishment, it won, which meant one of the stipulations is you have to publish it within 12 months. So I tried...
Without any support from the Gracian Foundation?
No, they give you a bit of money to self-publish it, because that's what we all do. So I went to, there are some local publishing houses in Colombo. There still are, but they all seem to say, we can get it out in Sri Lanka, but we can't guarantee it'll come out. So I thought, I might as well do it myself. And so, yeah, I got my wife to design the cover. I got my friend to do the typesetting. And it was a big 600-page tome. It's still floating around. We did 2 editions of it. It'll be a collector's item on eBay, I think. But I didn't, and I remember I tried every Friday, I would send out 5 queries. So in those days, I posted it. So you have a sample chapter, a synopsis, a query, you put it in an envelope. And I was targeting, because it was a cricket book, I thought, I've been told many times Americans don't give a crap about cricket, but I thought, India, Pakistan, South Africa, New Zealand, perhaps I can target those places. So every Friday, 5 would be posted. And I did that for a good year. And while that happened, the book was out in Sri Lanka, I got married, I took a job, and I went to Singapore, and I kind of moved on with my life. And then I was fortunate enough to be at the Galle Literary Festival, which I hear is going to be resurrected again, lovely festival in the south of Sri Lanka. And I was in conversation with the writer Amit Varma, and afterwards he said, why are you self-publishing this thing? And I told him my story of woe, and he said, no, don't just post this stuff out, it's just going to be read by an intern who's going to chuck it in a slush pile. Here are the emails of the publishers from HarperCollins and Penguin and so on. And so I spammed these publishers with my little manuscript. And yeah, Chiki Sarkar, within a week, she said, I'm not into cricket, but I think there's potential here. It needs to be edited, let's do it. And I was working in Singapore doing a corporate job, but I was delighted that the book would come out in India. And then she sold it on to the UK. And I was happy to have an editor is such a blessing, because I knew this story, I wanted it to be a nice 200-page, slick little thriller. It was 600 pages of drunken rambling, so I knew that it needed to be edited.
Final word count would have been lower than the...
I think it ended up about 350 pages, so she took out a chunk.
How long did you edit the manuscript with Chiki?
I think about a year.
1 year of editing?
Yeah. So I think it came out in Sri Lanka 2009. 2010 we published it. It was 2011 when 2011 I think when the Random House version came out. But see, you don't, as a Sri Lankan writer, this is a fortune, this is a lottery. You don't take it for granted. I mean, I suspect my next book will not have so much trouble finding a publisher, but like you said, it was 10 years between the second book, and the struggle is real. You don't expect that your story that's very specific to Sri Lanka is going to have wide appeal. So I accepted that, but you go on and you write and you do the thing. And so that was the journey. And I think most Sri Lankan writers, this is what they look at. Either we self-publish it and then try and get someone interested in it.
Let's talk about 7 Moons of Mali Almeida, which has had a very interesting journey. So many versions. It was originally conceived as a horror slasher story. Then you decided to, and the setting was also different. The time period for that novel was different. And then you decided to do away with it. But you retained one character from that story, who is Mali Almeida, the main protagonist of the story. And then in 2015, there was an interview of yours with Smriti Daniel, where she mentioned this book, Dance of the Devil, which is also which closely resembles 7 Moons. And of course, the Penguin India edition was Chats with the Dead. And once that came out, you started looking for publishers in the UK, US, and then you found someone in UK who made you work on it for 2 years. So we have 2 different versions in the market, and then there are different stories that you are planning to develop into 7 Moons. So just tell me about this journey.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds depressing when you say it. It seems I'm doomed to write every book like multiple times. I wish I could write it once like Lee Child and just have it out. He writes 9 months and the book's out, it sells 1 million and then
or
he
you
does
can
the next
find
one.
a team of writers who can write for you, and then you can lend your name to...
Yeah, I think that's
some of the genre writers.
That's a problem in itself, wrangling writers to write for you. But yeah, I think, okay, the genesis of it was, so, yeah, Chinaman comes out in 2012. And then it was, again, to my astonishment, it won the DSC, it won Commonwealth. It came out in the US under a different title. And then suddenly everyone's asking, what's your next trick? And when you write your first book, you're not thinking about your second, third book. I mean, maybe some writers are ambitious, but I wasn't. And then suddenly everyone's going, what's your next book? Is it going to be about football or badminton? And I thought, look, I'm done with sports. And I was quite sick of talking about cricket because I've been doing it for a while, and Sri Lankan cricket was also, I was writing about 1996 to 99, the golden age, and Sri Lankan cricket was in decline, and I'd stopped watching the game because it was too depressing, and I was called on cricket panels to sit with Saurav Ganguly and
Shehan was on a cricket panel at the recently concluded Bangalore Lit Fest. So
yeah, that was, after a long time they put me on a cricket panel.
You came for there was a Sports Books Award that was held in Delhi before COVID. You came for that prize, right?
Yes, yeah. And I think I got COVID there. I think I was the first person to get COVID. I had never been that sick. It was on the way back. But yes, so I was tired of writing about cricket, so I thought, okay, what can be a second act that'll stop people doing this? So I thought I'll write a ghost story. And that's as much as I knew at the beginning, and there's plenty of ghost stories everywhere in the world, certainly in Sri Lanka. And the initial thought was, because one thing we found is wherever there's been trauma, wherever there's been a massacre, there are ghost stories. So like around the tsunami-ravaged coast, there were sightings of apparitions coming out of the ocean. And so I wrote this tsunami ghost story about a bus that travels around the coast, and typical slasher horror genre, 10 aid workers on the bus, one by one they end up dying or meeting with accidents. And it's a good idea, someone should write it. I certainly couldn't. And again, it takes just as long to write a crap book. So I'm suddenly in 2015, when I was talking to Smriti, I was hanging around cemeteries, visiting haunted houses, and but the book was not working, and put it away, wrote some short stories, had some children, wrote some children's books. So I got distracted, and then when I came back to this, And I think this is the difference between writers and normal civilians. Normal people write and they realize it's bad and they decide to do something better with their time. Writers, for some reason, we come back to the thing that we knew doesn't work and we try and extract something from it. And as you rightly said, the only thing that remained from Devil Dance was the ghost on the bus. There was a ghost on the bus called Marley Almeida, who was a dead war photographer. And then I realized, this is the guy you need to be writing your whole story about. And then I started again, and I think I finished a draft which became Chats with the Dead. So it was about this war photographer who goes around the afterlife interviewing all the victims of Sri Lanka's many tragedies and chatting to the dead. And I thought that was done, and that was also, I think I launched it at Mathrubhumi just before the pandemic, Jan 2020. And it struggled. India, there was a lot of publishing interest, I think because Chinaman had acquired a cult following, so they were eager for it.
It sells in large numbers till now.
Yeah, but it was strange because outside of India, everyone said this book is a mess, it's confusing, we don't know who the LTT, JVP, the IPKF, the Indian Peacekeeping Force, this is not going to relate to a Western reader.
That's the feedback that you got from publishers.
Yeah, and also these ghosts and these demons, it just seems very difficult to sell. And so I had to take another deep sigh and decide, okay, I'm going to have to rewrite this thing again. And luckily, Natanya Jans of Sort of Books, who I had an editorial relationship with, and this is another blessing, to have a good first reader who is kind but also truthful, and she was very much that.
And you work with her on your earlier books, and tell us more about Natanya and Sort of Books.
So I did some travel stories for them. So Sort of Books, they published the rough guides in the 80s and 90s. They were like a competitor to the Lonely Planet. So many travel books and non-fiction, but they did a few novels. And I did some travel writing for them, and I found them really good editorially. And so every time I was down in the dumps about a story, I'd send something to Natanya and say, what's wrong with this story? Is it working? And she would give some very sage advice. So again, I tried with Chats with the Dead. And even publishers and agents were saying, well, it's about Sri Lanka, tiny country, no one knows where it is. It's about a war that no one remembers. So don't feel bad, it may not get published elsewhere. Let's move on to your next book. And but I gave it to Natanya, and she said, well, I think it's got a lot of potential, but it needs a lot of work. And then I asked her, would you take it on? And they did, and of course the pandemic happened after that. So we had 2 years of non-publication and 2 years to fiddle with this thing.
And I think also you ended up putting in more editorial work because the publication date kept shifting because of the pandemic.
No, exactly that. So initially it was, okay, let's make it accessible to a Western reader. And so let's clarify. So that if you look at 7 Moons, there's a cheat sheet at the beginning that talks about who the LTT, who the JVP, who all these characters were. So just to make it clearer and less confusing, what are the rules of the afterlife? What do ghosts do? How do they move? How do they communicate? So that kind of stuff. But then suddenly it's 2020 and we realize we're not coming out of our homes anytime soon. So she said it's probably going to be published in 2021, September. You have another 9 to 12 months. Let's look at the ending. The ending doesn't quite land for me. The beginning's a bit confusing. The middle's boring. Other than that, it's a great book. But can we fix these little bits? And it went on from there. Then I think I've done it. And then there'll be a month of silence. She'll come back. Oh, terrific work, but Marley Almeida's not very likable. Can we fix that? Or that gruesome scene where bodies are fed to cats. I don't think that's going to...
That also appears in the start of the book. And
yeah, so scenes like that. So we ended up taking out stuff, rewriting stuff, adding new scenes. And so at the end of 2 years, it was exhausting work. But one thing I realized, though, every edit, the book became better. And this is something you have to, once you're over the initial kind of disgust that you have to rewrite this again, you realize that this is adding value. Instead of 50 pages, you are saying that thing in 20 pages and it's helping the pacing. So that was the journey, and it was done at the end of 2021 and put it away and moved on.
But how has been the response in Sri Lanka to the UK edition, because a lot of readers in Sri Lanka, they prefer Chats to the Dead to the new version. Also, the UK edition, a lot of, the explicit scenes, like they have been taken out, like from that edition. So what's the reason behind that?
So explicit scenes, you mean scenes of violence or scenes of sex?
Both.
And,
Both.
Yeah, I think, so answer to the first part is, and I have to apologize for making people read the same book twice. There's limited time, there's plenty of great books, and why are you reading the same book twice? And I feel bad about that. And it's strange, I haven't gone back to Chats with the Dead, and I haven't gone back to Seven Moons after that. I haven't done a side-by-side comparison, though I know there are people out there who are doing that. And I have heard, even at this festival, people saying, I've read Chats with the Dead, I don't want to read this westernized version, I'm happy with this. But I think, and it's confusing to have two books with different titles, essentially the same story. So in Sri Lanka, I think, I don't know, it again came out during the pandemic, so it didn't make a big splash. I think a few people read it. I do think Seven Moons is a better book in terms of that it's much more tightly paced, and it's, doesn't have that kind of digression and the flap that Chats with the Dead does. But perhaps there are scenes in, maybe someone can do a comparison and talk about it, but not me. Huh?
It's going to be very difficult, sorry. One should do the comparisons if we get the final PDF files or something.
Yeah, but I think what's going to happen is Seven Moons will replace Chats with the Dead, but again, collector's items. So all this stuff, if you have a signed copy of Chats with the Dead or the original Chinaman, might be worth something on eBay in 20 years or whatever eBay evolves into. But yeah, it's, I'm not sure about the Sri Lankan reaction. I think obviously in this year of turmoil, everyone's quite euphoric that we won this great accolade, and so people have got behind Seven Moons. But yeah, there is that talk that I prefer the original version.
So you've also been writing a lot of short stories, and in your debut collection of short stories, Birth Lottery and Other Surprises, you've acknowledged all the prizes, international prizes for which you entered some of these short stories, and you were never longlisted or shortlisted. So tell me about how did you start writing short stories, and also Birth Lottery, the collection, which is very eclectic and eccentric and plays with form and is so experimental.
So with that, it's also a form of procrastination. So when you're writing this epic novel that's taking 7 years, and it's not working, I try and distract myself. And I'm used to, I worked in advertising, so I'm used to having like 5 briefs on your table. You've got to jump from milk powder to washing machines to cars within the course of a day. So I had this long to-do list. So I tried my hand at writing children's books. And the short stories were, these prizes that you mentioned. There are a lot of short story prizes around. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give myself a goal of 2 short stories a year and try and enter them for these prizes. And of course, I enter them every year. They don't even get long-listed. You get a polite acknowledgement. And, but what happened was I would then look at the stuff that won, study that, and then try, okay, next year I'm going to write something just like this. Did that, no dice, nothing happens. And the next year I think, okay, forget these prizes and what juries want. I'm going to write a story in text messages, or story as a Facebook, or a tiny story that's a paragraph. And so I did a few experimental stories as well. And then the next year I think, okay, I'm going to write a very conventional story. And so it was a bit of fun to occupy my mind while I was struggling with the novel. And then again, during the pandemic, terrible time for humanity, but not a bad time for writers from what I've talked to most of the writers here, because you're stuck in a house full of unread books. We all buy more books than we read. And so I thought, okay, books aren't coming into the country, so let me just read every book here. And that's in the house that I haven't touched. And let me try and finish some of these stories that are lying around. And while I was finishing Seven Moons, I realized I had some 30-something stories. And I kind of brushed those into shape and took the best ones and compiled it. So I don't think it's a concept album, Birth Lottery. There's no one theme apart from the fact that it's all about Sri Lanka and perhaps all about absurdity. It's more like a compilation album of different tracks from different genres. But then again, when the Booker hype happened, because I thought the short stories would come out maybe next year or the year after, but when the Booker hype happened, the publisher said, okay, no, let's get the short stories out as well. And so that's why you have this short on, close on the tails of 7 Moons, you have the birth lottery as well. But it began as just a diversion. And I would say over 20 years, the first story is like 2002. It was one of the first things I'd ever written that I'd completed. So yeah, I'm not sure I've quite mastered the short story form, but it was a nice diversion, and now it's come out as another book.
So has your long and illustrious career as a advertising copywriter helped you with your fiction? You told me that it allowed you to be very open to, very negative feedback from editors and readers, because that's what copywriters, advertising copywriters get all the time from their clients. So
I think having a day job's not a bad idea. I think that's, you can't, especially if you write as slowly as me, you can't sit around waiting for a Booker Prize. You have to, you got kids and bills to pay. So having a day job I appreciated in that, at least the bills are paid and then I can go on to write my fiction. So initially I used to go to work. I worked in ad agencies and I'd wake up at 4 in the morning, write for 3-4 hours and then put on a shirt and go to work. And, but I think one of the good things with being a copywriter is now there's a robust freelance economy, which the pandemic has exacerbated. So now you can sit anywhere in the world and write for clients wherever. So now I might work for 2 days a week writing copy, and then I have the rest of the 5 days to work on fiction. So I think in that way it helps because it keeps you sane, and you don't, because you feel bad if you quit your job and you spend 3 months working on a chapter which you have to throw away. You think, what have I done with my life? I'm wasting my time. I should go back to work and forget this fiction thing. But so that balance was good. But I think also with copywriting, you have to come up with an idea whether you like it or not. If the client's turning up on Wednesday and it's Tuesday afternoon and you have nothing, you better have something by the next morning. So you can't wait it out for inspiration. I think I took that lesson into writing fiction as well, where you sit there on Monday and Tuesday and nothing happens. You make sure you sit there on Wednesday and extract something, even something bad. So I think it forces you to be creative even when you don't feel like it, which, let's face it, most times not writing is the easiest thing in the world. Most of the times you don't feel like writing. So I think that was one aspect that I can thank copywriting and the advertising world for. But the other thing, as you say, feedback. You think you've cracked the brief, you've nailed it, and it comes back with 5 clients scribbling stuff on it. And when you're young, you go and you sulk and you think, I'm done with this career, I got to find something else. But I think when you get older, you still sulk, but you don't sulk for as long. And then you realize, okay, let me take these comments and try and make this thing better for these comments. So I think that's something I carried into when editors come back to me saying, it's a lot different editing a 400-page novel to editing a radio spot or a TV commercial. But it's the same principle. You have to take the feedback, and also you can push back on it. But I recognize that as part of the process. I didn't feel that it was diminishing what I was doing by having to change it. So I think, I do, as much as I diss advertising and all that, I think I do owe it a lot.
So Shehan, what was your first reaction when you found out that you were longlisted for the Booker Prize and the subsequent shortlisted and the win? Were you prepared for all of this?
Of course not. How can you be prepared? Sri Lanka was imploding. A year ago, what a year it's been. I was in Iowa with Madhu, who's sitting over there. We were, a year ago, sitting in Iowa in the snow, thinking, and by that time I'd finished 7 Moons. And this is the weird thing. So 7 Moons, it's the same book that nobody wanted to touch 12 months ago. But I knew, okay, it's done. And you have this moment where when you finish a book, you say, okay, I've done my best. Maybe no one will read it. Maybe no one will review it, but I've done my best and I'm going to move on. It's very hard, easier said than done. But I was in that mindset and I had started a 3rd novel. And I knew the book was going to come out in August. And the publishers keep the bad news from you. But, I heard they tried to get it reviewed. And a lot of the reviewers were saying, oh, that's very good. We'll put it on our list, which basically means they're not going to do anything with it. But so they were struggling to get it reviewed. And we were thinking, how are we going to launch this in August? But meanwhile, we had other things to worry about. I came back from Iowa, and all of Sri Lanka was on the streets. There were petrol queues and gas queues and food shortages, and trying to kick out. And we saw what happened, the pictures of people jumping in the president's pool, sitting on the president's couch, watching his TV, and all that kind of absurd shenanigans. But after the president fled and we had a new government, we had the reality of petrol queues and gas queues. And I remember my wife was in a petrol queue for 4 days. And I was like, I'm not queuing up for petrol. It's the apocalypse. Let's buy bicycles and let's just now let's move back to the 19th century and move on. But she was determined. She says, no, I hear there's a petrol truck coming from Jaffna. I'm sure if I stay in the queue long enough, I can do this. And so she was in the petrol queue. I was taking the kids to school and to classes. And that's when I got the frantic jubilation phone call from Netanya and Mark saying, we made the Booker long list. And so, I couldn't really celebrate. I was at my kids' class, but I thought, okay, wow, this is wonderful. At least the book will now get reviewed, and at least there's a story behind it. And I remember very well that Friday, my wife finally got a full tank of petrol. And some friends came over to our house and they go, hey, congratulations, full tank of petrol, wonderful. Oh, well done on the Booker, by the way, well done. But the petrol seemed a bigger victory than the Booker long list. And then, you don't, look, I wasn't able to read the long list then because books were not being supplied to Sri Lanka. Books are not essential services when you don't have gas or petrol or food or medicine. But I followed the long list and I realized it was quite a creative long list. And so I thought, okay, I'm happy to be part of this. It's a 1 in 13 chance that I'll make it to the next round. And I had that attitude, but then we got the shortlist news. So then, okay, 1 in 6 chance. It's a dice roll. But again, I was happy with that. I thought, okay, now we'll get to travel to England and be part of that circus. And then someone else will win and I'll have a holiday. And so each step I kind of kept it that way. But then, of course, on the night, I thought all I had to do is wear a suit and talk to the king's wife and have a drink and go home. But then they read out the name and they didn't usually judges take a long time. They do a big preamble and a drum roll. This time, Neil McGregor just went for it. And then, I don't remember. I haven't watched that speech at all. I know a lot of people have. I was there. I know what happened. I just thought, have I got my notes in my pocket? Because you don't want to wing it in that situation. And Romesh Gunasekara, the great Sri Lankan writer and my mentor, he said, because he was shortlisted along with Abdul Razak Gurna, I think in '94, he said, don't drink too much. He said, that's my advice, because if you drink too much and you lose, you're going to make a spectacle of yourself. And if you win, you're going to make an even bigger spectacle of yourself. So I took his advice. I had 1 glass of wine, and then, they read out the name, and I did the speech in English, Sinhala, and Tamil before they pulled me off. And since then, I've been living in a lit fest with a mic in my hand. I haven't been writing much, but
You mentioned so many times in your interviews and also in private that how much you miss, being anonymous and writing quietly.
No, certainly.
But are you not secretly enjoying all this fame and attention?
Of course, you have to enjoy this stuff because, you write thinking no one's, like I said, first book, you self-publish it, you're happy if it comes out in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, you're happy with that. So when fortune shines on you like this, you can't be ungrateful. So, of course, I'm enjoying it. But I also, I go to parties and I kind of hang in the corner and I observe people and, I like doing that, just slipping into parties, finding someone and not engaging. Now when I walk into a party, kind of suddenly everyone's taking selfies and talking to me, so I can't be anonymous, so I can't really, so that's a bit weird. I've been unapproachable for most of my life and now everyone's approaching me, so that's a bit strange. Also between Kolkata and Jaipur and this lovely festival, I had 4 days at home. And that was bliss. I just sat at my desk and pretended to be a writer, took the kids to school, sat there and read. I didn't write that much. But I do kind of miss that because that's what we do, right? We spend years, months in one room, not talking to anyone, talking to yourself, talking to imaginary characters, and maybe occasionally talking to your family if you're in a good mood. And so that's the kind of shift, because I'm not doing much of that, but I'm doing a lot of talking. But look, like I say, I can't be ungrateful for it, but I am looking forward to the time where the circus dies down and I get to sit back and write another book. Because one thing I know, and I learned from Chinaman, just because you've written one book doesn't mean the next book's going to write itself. Just because you won an award doesn't mean the next thing's going to win 2 awards. It's still going to be hard grind, and I think, yeah, if the next book is mediocre, it's going to get slammed, and I have to bear that and do the work.
Talking about next books, has winning the Booker Prize changed your vision for your future works, or had you already started working on something before you were shortlisted and like before you won the prize? So, I mean, do you feel pressured to conform to a certain style of writing, you know, even storytelling?
Not a style of writing, but the pressure is always there, whether you win a prize or not. Even, you know, writing an email, I feel the pressure, you know, am I going to get this right? So I think writing, it always comes, and that's why you procrastinate and you do a lot of silly things before you actually sit down, usually an hour before the deadline, and type something frantically. But no, I had that all when I was in Iowa. So I have a third novel, which, yeah, I haven't written much since October, but I made some progress on it. It's about Sri Lanka. It doesn't have any ghosts or any cricket in it, though it has a fair deal of absurdity. I'm also writing a children's book about insects. I become fascinated with insects. My little boy sits there and he brings me cockroaches and praying mantises and butterflies, and so that's one project. I'm writing another kid's book about sleep, and there might be a screenplay. So there's enough stuff to keep me busy. I'm not thinking like, you think 1 year at a time, one book at a time. So that's as far as I'm going, but the pressure is always there.
Shehan, can you tell us more about Papaya Books, your publishing imprint for children, and the books you've published under that imprint? And also, I would like you to talk about your collaboration with your brilliant brother, Lalit Karunatilaka, who also did illustrations for his latest collection of short stories.
Yeah, so Lalit, all the illustrations in Chinaman, there's all these little diagrams about what a bat and a ball and a pitch and a left leg spin and all that. So that was his illustrations. In Chats with the Dead, those pictures of these ghosts was all him. I should probably pay him. No, I haven't. Yeah, you have his money, right? Okay. You need to give him some royalties. But yeah, I mean, the part you played as well in this. So I remember, you know, we were talking, and I just had 2 kids, and I was reading to them every night. And you know, there's a lot of wonderful children's books out there. There's also a lot of not so wonderful children's books. And there's one particular book called The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which sells 1 million copies every year since 1969. I don't think even the author knows why. Though now a lot of mothers have told me it's because it's got shades of colors, it teaches them how to count, teaches them about food, though not nutritious food. That caterpillar eats a lot of crap before he becomes a butterfly. Sorry, spoiler alert, that is the big plot twist. But I thought, okay, this book, it sells 1 million copies every year. Why am I spending 7 years writing literary fiction that maybe no one will read? And me and my brother said, I'm sure in a month we can do something like this, so let's do a book every year. And we were observing our kids. So the first one, I mean, I have some copies here. Please don't put them. You can put it out.
Read out.
No, I don't know if I'm going to do a reading from that. But yeah, so this was the first one which you helped me sell. Please don't put that in your mouth. That was when my daughter took a paintbrush thinking it was ice cream and started chewing it, and my son started like pulling wires. It was just a cautionary tale about that. And it was a fun project, and my brother did these kind of strange illustrations. The next year, which I really believe this is my masterpiece, Where Shall I Poop? It's about the pooping habits. It came out the same year as 7 Moons, but I think this is very underappreciated. This is Papaya Books as well. And so there's another in this series on sleep. And then last year I did one, so now my kids get a bit older, so that's kind of 0 to 3. But I just realized we buy a lot of books as presents, and there's always kids being born, 0 to 3. There's always kids out there, and people give gifts. So I thought, okay, let's get into this game while I'm struggling with with the novel. But then my kids got a bit older, so those sneaky plants. This is about what plants do when humans are asleep, that plants are sentient and they actually
And the illustrations
rule the
were
planet.
not done by...
This was not Lalit's
Yeah.
illustrations. I had another illustrator, Ruangi, who did this. So the new one, I'm doing one in this series on insects, another one on sleep. And with your advice, we decided to do it ourselves as our own little business. Of course, my brother's a great illustrator, but a crap businessman, as am I. And so, yeah, we may need some help. But, you know, the books are selling okay, and so that's a nice little side project to have your own publishing thing going. But like I say, I like having multiple projects going at the time, and hopefully now we've escalated from 1 book a year, we're going to do 2 books a year, and hopefully have, in 10 years, we can do a Hungry Caterpillar. Who knows?
So Shehan, you've also done a lot of screenplays. You've written a lot of screenplays.
Just a couple, yeah.
So just tell us about the screenplay writing.
So again, during the pandemic, as you can see, I had a very busy pandemic, even though I was sitting in my room talking to no one. Because I used to go to Singapore to freelance for a few months and then work on the writing. And with the pandemic, it meant that planes were grounded. And so I was in a bit of a panic, like how am I going to now earn a living and finish this book? And then as these things happen, a gift came. They were doing a biopic of Muttaiah Muralidharan, the great Sri Lankan right-arm off-spinner. And initially I was just supposed to give him some, I think the director Sripati had read Chinaman and he wanted some advice on whether the Sri Lankanness was there. But in the end I ended up co-writing. And I knew I said that I'm not going to touch cricket again. And Suresh Menon's walking in here. But I was fascinated by Muralidharan for 2 reasons. One, he is, inarguably the greatest test bowler of all time, 800 wickets. No one looks close to touching that, though. Maybe with the amount of cricket that's been played, that record will be broken. But for now, he's taken 800 wickets, though there is a significant part of cricket fans who believe that his action was illegal and that his wickets were illegitimate and that he shouldn't be talked of as all-time great. So that was interesting to me, navigating that and navigating how this man, who's always seen smiling on the pitch, taking wickets, how he dealt with, on one hand being, because every time he was given the ball, he was expected to take 5 wickets. I mean, Sri Lanka had Chaminda Vas, him, and a few other bowlers, but it was the Murali show. So that was one thing that was interesting. But the other thing was him as a Tamil. So he was the lone Tamil in the 96 winning cricket team as well. Yeah, I think he was. And the fact is, the war was raging at the time, but yet the whole nation rallied behind Muralidharan after he got no-balled, and he became the catalyst for that 96 win. And it just seemed curious, how did this one Tamil boy from the plantations fit into that predominantly Sinhalese dressing room, and how did he become this talismanic, iconic figure? But then, of course, as his career went on, a lot of Tamil people felt that he was somewhat of a race traitor, that he didn't speak up enough for the Tamil people. And then I think after his career ended, he sat on stages with politicians. And so when the film was coming out also, there was this controversy. Why are you writing about this guy? This guy is a disgrace to the Tamil race, even though he's done a lot of charity work building tsunami houses. So this contradiction was what attracted me to that screenplay. Was he a great bowler? Was he a fraud? And I would say if he had spoken out, I mean, my opinion, if he had spoken out and become political, he perhaps would not have taken 800 wickets. The fact that he kept silent, and there's a complaint, he never spoke in Tamil in public, he always spoke Sinhalese. So this was the interesting thing. So more than just a cricket biopic. I mean, sports biopics have the same kind of structure, right? I'm nobody, I have this adversity, and then I have this triumph. But these things were what interested me, so I spent a couple of years on that, and I think it's being edited now. I don't know how it's going to turn out. You never know with these things, but yeah, it should be coming out soon. That's about it. I mean, there's a few other screenplay ideas that are floating around, but I haven't really got my teeth into them yet.
So are any of your books, novels getting translated into Malayalam? Or?
I think so. It's very strange. Again, this is the power of getting this prize, because Chinaman was published in English, and Sinhala. With greatest difficulty, we got into Sinhala.
Sinhala edition came out many years after the book was published in English.
And it was a struggle, and I just managed to get a Tamil translate for Chinaman. But Seven Moons, like I said, it was the same book that no one was interested in until the Booker long list, short list. After the Booker win, you were at the Frankfurt Fair, they got stampeded. So I think it's been translated into 26 languages. Estonia, Slovenia, Latvia, and because of that, Chinaman's coming out in China. This was it's coming out in China under a different title for obvious reasons. So in America, it's not called Chinaman because in America, Chinaman's a bit of a problematic term. It is a problematic term. I'm surprised we're still using it. But so that's the one thing America and China agree on is that my first novel needs a different title. But now, so I was told for many years, Italians don't care about cricket, Bulgarians don't care about cricket, so write another book that doesn't have cricket and we'll try and sell it.
All of them care about the Booker Prize.
But they all care about the Booker Prize. So so it looks like Seven Moons is going to be published widely, and I think Chinaman may, I hope.
Be out in Malayalam soon, I think. DC.
So your question, I think, Seven Moons has certainly been sold in Malayalam and Tamil and Sinhalese and Bengali as well, I believe. Chinaman, I think, I don't know if the deals are finalized, but it should come out in Malayalam as well.
So Shehan, on your website, you describe yourself as a failed cricketer, failed rock star, failed vegan. Okay, just this last question. Okay. So on your website, you describe yourself as a failed cricketer, failed rock star, failed vegan, observer of people, machines, and markets. Does not know how to use semicolons and unable to spell diarrhea without assistance. So can you tell us...
Can anyone spell diarrhea without assistance? I'll put that challenge to you. You don't have to tell me, think about it. And does anyone know how to use semicolons? I think there's a few people who know how to use semicolons.
I just want to know more about who is Shehan the person and how much of this person is reflected in your writing, especially the main central characters of your novels. And then we can move to the Q&A.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly accurate description. I used to bowl left arm leg spin. I could bowl a decent googly, but I bowl about 3 full tossers and get hammered. So failed cricketer is accurate. With music, I sounded like Radiohead and Mozart until I picked up the instrument, and then things went pretty south. And vegan, maybe I can work on that. That's an ongoing project. But me as a person, I think if you look at the 2 big books, Mali Almeida's very different from me. He's probably a much braver, much more adventurous, maybe a much more moral person than I am. And W.G. Karunasena, who I have a lot of affection to, is a man who's was twice my age at the time of writing it, from a different generation, held different beliefs. So I do like hiding behind narrators, and so I can say cheeky things, controversial things that I may not be brave enough to say in my real life. So I don't know if there's a lot of my personality in there, though you may find a few side characters. WG's son is a failed guitarist who has one hit that he lives off for the rest of his life. Maybe that was my fantasy as a musician, to have one hit that I could live off. So you can see this laziness. I want to have the hungry caterpillar. I want to have one hit. I think I'm happy to be a one-hit wonder, but everyone's happy to be a one-hit wonder until you have that one hit, and then everyone asks, what's your next thing? But so I don't know. I think I'd like to think I hide behind better characters than myself.